The ineffable consensus shuttle descended gracefully, its metallic hull gleaming in the sunlight as it landed beside a modest roadside establishment, Mama June's Southern Kitchen. The diner, with its peeling red and white paint and flickering neon sign, stood as an unassuming testament to Earth's rural charm. Inside, the murmur of conversation stilled. Forks hovered mid-air, cups of coffee paused just shy of lips, and all eyes turned toward the window as the hiss of the shuttle's landing ramp filled the air. Two towering figures emerged, their multi-limbed forms silhouetted against the bright interior of their craft. Commander Veltrin stepped forward, his carapace gleaming in the sun. Behind him, Lieutenant Korn trailed nervously, his antennae twitching with each noise. Veltrin's compound eyes scanned the diner with deliberate precision, his expression unreadable. The smell hit them first. A heady, rich aroma of grease, smoke, and something faintly sweet wafted through the air, striking both aliens with the force of an uncharted solar wind. Korn recoiled slightly, his mandibles clicking in alarm. Commander Korn said, his voice low and tense, the chemical composition of this atmosphere suggests an alarming concentration of saturated fats and volatile sugars. Prolonged exposure could. Veltrin raised a claw, silencing him. Lieutenant, this establishment represents a cultural artifact. Observe before you conclude. Inside, Mama June wiped her hands on her apron and stepped to the counter. She squinted through the window at the shimmering craft, then at the strange figures entering her diner. A slow smile spread across her face. Well, ain't this something, she said, leaning forward. You all here to eat, or is this some kind of intergalactic health inspection? Veltrin ducked through the doorway, his elongated form barely squeezing into the space. I am Commander Veltrin of the Galactic Unity Fleet, he said, his voice calm and deliberate. We are here to investigate the biological and cultural properties of your breakfast. The room fell silent. Hank Wheeler, a local who practically lived in his denim jacket and trucker hat, leaned back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. You serious? He asked, chuckling. You all came from outer space to check out Mama June's breakfast. Yes, Veltrin replied, unflinching. Our scans indicate that your cuisine contains alarmingly high concentrations of sodium, fats, and sugars. By galactic health standards, it constitutes a Class 4 biochemical hazard. We must evaluate it firsthand to determine its impact. Mama June raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching with amusement. And the best way to judge something like that, she said, is to taste it. Why don't you all have a seat? I'll fix you up a plate. Korn stiffened. Commander, this is inadvisable. The potential for metabolic destabilization. Enough, Lieutenant Veltrin said, silencing him with a raised claw. To understand Earth's culture, we must experience it firsthand. He turned to Mama June. Lead on, madam. The two aliens sat awkwardly in a corner booth, their segmented forms making the human-sized furniture seem comically inadequate. Veltrin sat with his usual stoic demeanor, while Korn fidgeted, his antennae twitching nervously. The clatter of pans and the warm hum of Mama June's voice filled the air. Hank slid into the booth across from them, grinning. You all are in for a treat, he said, tilting his hat back. Mama June's breakfast is the best this side of the Mississippi. Might even be the best in the whole galaxy. Veltrin tilted his head. Your enthusiasm suggests significant cultural importance. You bet, Hank replied, sipping his coffee. It's tradition. Comfort. A way to bring people together. Veltrin considered this. Intriguing. Before he could ask more, Mama June returned, balancing two heaping plates. She set them down with a flourish, revealing a feast of scrambled eggs, golden hash browns, crisp bacon, glistening slices of country ham, and two towering biscuits drenched in creamy sausage gravy. There ya go, boys, she said, placing steaming mugs of black coffee beside the plates. Eat up. Veltrin stared at the plate, his sensory nodes overwhelmed by the riot of colors and aromas. Slowly he picked up the fork, mimicking the human's technique, and speared a piece of bacon. The crowd watched in silence as he raised it to his mandibles and took his first bite. The smoky, salty flavor hit him like an electric current, followed by the rich, savory fat. Veltrin froze, his segmented body quivering as his sensory nodes processed the overwhelming signals. "Well," Hank asked, leaning forward with a grin, "what do ya think?" Veltrin straightened, setting the fork down with deliberate care. "This substance is alarming." Corn exhaled in relief. "I knew it." An extraordinary Veltrin interrupted, grabbing another piece of bacon. The room erupted in laughter and cheers as Veltrin continued eating, his precise movements growing more animated with each bite. Corn, despite his protests, reached for a piece of ham. "This is reckless," Corn muttered, taking a nibble. His antennae stiffened and his eyes widened. "Impossible. The texture is both firm and yielding. The flavor intense yet balanced. How do humans consume this regularly without immediate combustion?" "They're resilient," Hank said, winking. Veltrin turned his attention to the biscuits and gravy. He tore off a piece of biscuit, letting it soak in the rich sauce before tasting it. The creamy, peppery flavor paired with the fluffy biscuit left him momentarily speechless. "This dish," he said finally, "should be studied. Its ability to combine disparate elements into a harmonious whole is unparalleled." Mama June chuckled. "Well, sugar, you've only just begun. You all tried grits yet?" Veltrin tilted his head. "Describe this." "Grits." Mama June smiled. "Hold tight. I'll fix ya some." As she disappeared into the kitchen, Veltrin looked at Corn, who was carefully inspecting the remnants of his plate. "This meal," Veltrin said quietly, "contains potential far beyond sustenance. It is a window into human culture. We must proceed with caution. But we must proceed." Corn sighed, nibbling reluctantly on another piece of ham. "I hope your caution includes a contingency for cardiac arrest." The crowd chuckled as the scent of freshly cooked grits wafted from the kitchen. The diner buzzed with a quiet anticipation as Mama June returned from the kitchen, balancing a steaming bowl of grits on her palm. The creamy concoction shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights, with a pat of butter slowly melting into its center. She set the bowl down in front of Veltrin, along with a small tray of toppings: shredded cheese, salt, pepper, and a tiny jar of sorghum syrup. "There ya go, shoo," she said, her voice warm. "Start plain, then play around with the extras. That's how folks figure out how they like em." Veltrin studied the bowl with his compound eyes. The grits were a puzzling mix of textures, somewhere between solid and liquid. He picked up the spoon cautiously, scooping a small portion of the plain grits, and brought it to his mandibles. The room held its collective breath. Veltrin stilled as the subtle flavor spread across his sensory nodes, a faint, earthy sweetness carried by the creamy texture. He clicked his mandibles thoughtfully before speaking. "The flavor is grounding. It offers stability without overwhelming the senses. Fascinating." "That's just the base," Mama June said with a knowing smile. "Try it with some butter and cheese. Or a little syrup, if you're feeling bold." Veltrin added a sprinkle of cheese, watching it melt into the warm grits before taking another bite. The richness deepened, the sharpness of the cheese complementing the buttery undertones. He tried salt and pepper next, then hesitated as he poured a small drizzle of sorghum syrup into a spoonful. The moment the sweetness hit, Veltrin froze. His segmented body quivered, his claws tapping rhythmically on the table as he processed the contrast. "This dish," he said slowly, "is a foundation for infinite variation. It invites experimentation and rewards creativity. Remarkable." Hank laughed, slapping the table. "You're starting to sound like a food critic, Commander." Veltrin tilted his head. "A critic implies judgment. I am simply observing what is undeniable. This grits dish is adaptable to individual preference, making it universally approachable." Across the table, Corn stared at the grits as if it were a biological threat. "I fail to see the appeal. It appears unstable." "You just gotta try it," Hank said, grinning. The room erupted in cheers and encouragement as Corn hesitantly took a small spoonful of plain grits. His antennae stiffened, and his mandibles clicked as he analyzed the flavor. Slowly he set the spoon down, his voice quiet but incredulous. "This substance defies logic. A grain should not evoke such a complex response. And yet he trailed off, reluctantly taking another bite. See? Told ya, Mama June said with a wink. As the meal continued, Mama June brought out fried catfish and collard greens, explaining the significance of the dishes in Southern culture. Veltrin dissected each bite of the catfish with meticulous precision, marveling at the contrast between its crispy exterior and tender interior. This preparation, he observed, appears to prioritize textural contrast. Ingenious. The collard greens, with their slight bitterness tempered by a savory seasoning, elicited a more subdued response. They possess an intriguing aftertaste, Veltrin said. A deliberate bitterness, perhaps to encourage reflection. Corn, meanwhile, hesitated before trying the catfish. After a small bite, his claws trembled, and he muttered, "The exterior is too aggressive. But the interior is almost forgiving. How is this possible?" "It's called fried," Lieutenant Hank said with a laugh. "You'll get used to it." The final dish arrived with considerable fanfare, a towering stack of buttermilk pancakes, each layer glistening with melted butter. Mama June poured a stream of molasses syrup over the stack, the amber liquid cascading down the sides like molten gold. "This," she said, setting the plate in front of Veltrin, "is the crown jewel of breakfast." Veltrin studied the pancakes carefully. They appeared deceptively simple. "They're more than they look," Mama June said, smiling. "Give them a try." Veltrin sliced into the stack, lifting a syrup-soaked piece to his mandibles. He paused for a moment, as though preparing for a significant moment in history. Then he ate. The tangy richness of the buttermilk paired with the deep sweetness of the molasses syrup created a perfect balance. Veltrin's mandibles twitched, his sensory nodes firing so rapidly that his claws tapped rhythmically against the table. "This," he said slowly, "is transcendent. It is light yet substantial, sweet yet grounded, a marvel of simplicity and complexity." The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping and whistling as Veltrin took another bite. Corn groaned audibly, throwing up his claws. "Commander, I must protest. This is no longer an investigation, it is a descent into indulgence." Mama June slid a smaller plate of pancakes in front of Corn with a wink. "You're gonna eat those words, sugar? Try 'em." Corn sighed dramatically but took a cautious bite. His antennae twitched violently and he froze, his claws trembling. It should not work. The sweetness overwhelms, yet the texture stabilizes. It is tolerable. "Another convert," Hank exclaimed, raising his coffee mug in a toast. By the end of the meal, Veltrin and Corn were surrounded by empty plates and satisfied smiles. Veltrin stood, addressing the gathered patrons. "This breakfast," he said, "is unlike anything I have encountered. It is not merely sustenance, it is an invitation to connect, to experiment, and to share. Humanity has created something extraordinary." Mama June smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "You all come back anytime, sugar. There's always more where that came from." Veltrin turned to Corn. "Lieutenant, prepare the samples. This investigation is far from over. We must test the effects of this cuisine aboard the ineffable consensus." Corn groaned, rubbing his temple. "If I survive this, I'm transferring to Nutrient Cube Logistics." The crowd laughed and cheered as Veltrin and Corn departed, their arms laden with carefully packed containers of biscuits, grits, and syrup. Humanity's breakfast had found its first galactic ambassadors. The ineffable consensus's mess hall had never smelled so rich. What was usually a sterile chamber of nutrient cubes and protein vapors now buzzed with activity, the air thick with the aroma of butter, molasses, and sizzling bacon. Crew members from across the galaxy gathered, their diverse physiologies reacting with varying degrees of anticipation or apprehension. Commander Veltrin stood at the head of a long metallic table laden with southern breakfast delicacies. Bowls of creamy grits, plates of golden biscuits smothered in sausage gravy, crispy bacon strips, country ham, and a towering stack of buttermilk pancakes drizzled with molasses syrup gleamed under the overhead lights. Crew of the ineffable consensus, Veltrin began. Addressing the assembly, "This is a moment of cultural significance. What you see before you is a human meal known as Southern breakfast. It is chaotic, indulgent, and, as we have learned, extraordinary. Lieutenant Korn stood nearby, his antennae drooping as he adjusted the monitoring device floating above the table. "Commander, I must reiterate this experiment is highly unorthodox. The caloric density and lipid content alone could destabilize at least half the species present." Veltrin raised a claw to silence him. "True discovery requires risk, Lieutenant. Let us proceed." The first to step forward was Ensign Corthan, a towering reptilian whose jagged scales shimmered like polished obsidian. She picked up a piece of country ham with her clawed hand, inspecting it carefully. "This substance appears robust," she said before taking a bite. Her pupils dilated instantly. A low growl rumbled from her chest as her scales shifted to a shimmering emerald hue. "This flavor is bold, salty. It resonates with my predatory instinct." She grabbed another slice. Nearby, Lieutenant Relka, a crystalline lifeform whose species subsisted on mineral vapors, hesitated. "Commander, I fail to see how carbon-based sustenance could provide any value to my kind." Veltrin gestured toward the table. "Try a fragment of biscuit with gravy. Humans describe the sensation as comforting." Relka extended a crystalline appendage, carefully picking up a crumb of biscuit dipped in gravy. The moment it touched her surface, a harmonic tone resonated through the hall, her form glowing with a soft, golden light. "This is unexpected," she said. The richness of the gravy paired with the biscuit's texture creates a sense of grounding. It mimics the stabilizing effects of quartz harmonization. Korn groaned. "It's just butter and starch." Relka ignored him, emitting another melodic hum as she reached for more. The reactions grew more varied as more crew members participated. A gaseous entity from the Nebrick sector attempted the molasses-covered pancakes, its vaporous tendrils stirring the syrup before inhaling a wisp. The room grew tense as the entity's body shimmered, its translucent core pulsing erratically. "Is it stabilizing?" Korn whispered. The Nebrixian emitted a soft, satisfied whistle. "This is delight. The sweetness mingles with the substance's density in a way that transcends my typical vapor meals." Veltrin nodded approvingly. Another success. But not all responses were positive. Speth, a gelatinous engineer from the Plo-Q Confederacy, took a cautious bite of bacon. His gelatinous form quivered violently, ripples cascading across his body as he emitted a sharp squeal. "Too intense. The smokiness destabilizes my cohesion." Medics rushed forward with nutrient gel to stabilize him as Korn buried his face in his claws. "I warned you, Commander." Despite the occasional mishap, the atmosphere in the mess hall was electric. Delegates from rival factions shared bowls of grits, debating the merits of adding cheese versus molasses syrup. A crystalline crew member composed a melodic symphony inspired by the complexity of gravy, while a reptilian engineer proclaimed country ham to be a warrior's fuel. Even Korn, despite his protests, found himself reluctantly sampling a piece of fried catfish. His mandibles clicked thoughtfully as he chewed. The exterior is alarmingly aggressive, but the interior offers a peculiar solace. It is tolerable. Hank's voice echoed in Veltrin's mind, and he couldn't help but think, "You're starting to sound like a local lieutenant." The climax of the experiment came when a delegation of diplomats from the Galactic Unity Council arrived aboard the ship. They were greeted with plates of biscuits and bowls of grits, their responses ranging from cautious nibbles to enthusiastic sampling. A crystalline counselor tilted its glowing form toward Veltrin. "Commander, your report on this meal has garnered considerable attention. However, we are concerned about its long-term implications. Reports of butter shortages have already been documented in several sectors." Veltrin inclined his head. "Esteemed counselor, I understand your concerns. However, I believe this breakfast offers a unique opportunity. Its ability to unite disparate species through shared experience is unparalleled. I propose we establish regulated cultural exchange programs, ensuring responsible distribution while maintaining its integrity." The counselor pulsed thoughtfully. A bold proposal. But does this meal warrant such attention? As if on cue, A gelatinous delegate from the Ploquet Confederacy stood, its once jittery form now stable and glistening. I was skeptical, it said, its voice bubbling. But this meal transcends biological boundaries. It fosters understanding. A crystalline being chimed in. The harmony of these flavors inspires creativity. My people will compose an ode to this. Gravy. The room buzzed with agreement as more delegates shared their experiences. The counselor nodded. Very well, Commander. Your proposal is approved. Southern breakfast will become an official cultural artifact of Earth, shared responsibly across the galaxy. Veltrin's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Thank you, Counselor. Humanity's tradition will serve as a beacon of unity. Back aboard the ineffable consensus, the mess hall became a hub of interstellar diplomacy. Chefs from distant planets arrived to learn the art of biscuit making, while visitors from across the galaxy swapped stories over bowls of grits. One afternoon, Veltrin sat at a table, savoring a slice of country ham and a perfectly buttered biscuit. Korn joined him, carrying a steaming mug of coffee and a small plate of fried catfish. Commander Korn said, sitting down with a resigned sigh, while I still find this mission profoundly illogical, I cannot deny its success. Veltrin inclined his head. Sometimes, Lieutenant, the greatest discoveries lie not in science, but in the simple traditions of a people. Korn took a reluctant bite of his catfish and muttered, I suppose after a pause, he added, but I draw the line at molasses syrup. Veltrin chuckled softly, raising his mug. To the unexpected. The room buzzed with laughter, conversation, and the smell of freshly baked biscuits, a testament to the unifying power of Southern breakfast. Months after the Galactic Unity Council officially recognized Southern breakfast as a cultural artifact, the galaxy was abuzz. Mama June's recipes had transcended Earth's boundaries, spreading across distant star systems like wildfire. Galactic chefs from hundreds of species traveled to Earth, or directly to the ineffable consensus to master the art of biscuit making, gravy crafting, and the delicate balance of molasses syrup atop pancakes. On board the ineffable consensus, the once sterile mess hall had become a lively hub of cultural exchange. Long tables groaned under the weight of steaming plates, and crew members from every corner of the galaxy swapped stories over shared meals. New recipes emerged daily as alien chefs adapted Southern breakfast to suit their physiologies, creating a melting pot of flavors and traditions. Despite the celebration, not everyone was prepared for the challenges of this culinary phenomenon. In a remote sector of the galaxy, the Galactic Culinary Exchange Festival was in full swing. The event, hosted aboard the ineffable consensus, brought together delegates, chefs, and dignitaries eager to sample Earth's most infamous meal. The centerpiece of the festival was the Interstellar Biscuit Bake-Off, where chefs of every species competed to perfect the humble Southern biscuit. Veltrin stood at the heart of the bustling festival, overseeing the proceedings with a mix of pride and curiosity. Lieutenant Korn, he said, turning to his ever-dutiful aide, what is the status of the bake-off? Korn, who now wore a chef's apron over his uniform begrudgingly embroidered with gravy expert, sighed. Commander, the contest is proceeding. Chaotically, he gestured toward the far end of the hall, where a gelatinous Ploquet chef was attempting to fold dough with its tentacle-like appendages. Across from it, a crystalline Shari delegate was vibrating at high frequency, trying to simulate the heat needed for baking. Chaos, Veltrin said, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully, often births innovation. Korn muttered, it also births disaster. The first hint of trouble came from the Nebrixian delegation. Their gaseous physiology had proven especially sensitive to butter, and as one Nebrixian inhaled a slice of bacon for the first time, it let out a high-pitched whistle. Too rich, it shrieked, dissolving into a cloud of shimmering vapor before its companions rushed to contain it in a portable chamber. Nearby, a reptilian Sharak chef devoured a plate of biscuits and gravy, then slammed his clawed hands on the table. This is fuel for battle. We must take this to the front lines. Veltrin intervened. Southern breakfast is a tool for unity, not war. Remember that. The Sharak grumbled but nodded, reluctantly offering a bowl of grits to a crystalline delegate. The two species, previously at odds, began an animated discussion about the merits of adding cheese versus molasses. Despite the occasional mishap, the festival reached new heights of camaraderie. A gelatinous Ploquet diplomat declared fried catfish a feat of engineering, while a vaporous Scorvian poet composed an ode to pancakes that brought tears or the alien equivalent to the eyes of its listeners. At the center of the hall, Mama June herself presided over a pancake flipping contest. Wearing a ceremonial sash that read Galactic Culinary Ambassador, she cheered as delegates from rival factions competed to see who could achieve the most artful flip. "That's it, Sugar," she called, clapping as a crystalline shari flipped a pancake mid-air and caught it with precision. "You all are naturals." Nearby, a reptilian delegate struggled to keep its pancake intact. "These tools are inadequate," it hissed, wielding a spatula like a weapon. Mama June stepped over, placing a calming hand on the reptile's scaly shoulder. "Now, darlin', breakfast ain't a fight, it's about patience and heart. Try again." The reptile grumbled but nodded, attempting another flip. This time, the pancake landed perfectly, drawing cheers from the crowd. Veltrin watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. "Lieutenant," he said, turning to Corn, "this festival embodies what we hope to achieve. Southern breakfast has transcended its origins, becoming a symbol of unity." Corn adjusted his apron, his antennae twitching. "Commander, I cannot deny the cultural impact. However, the long-term effects of such indulgence on galactic metabolisms remain uncertain." Veltrin placed a clawed hand on Corn's shoulder. "Not all discoveries can be calculated, Lieutenant. Some must simply be experienced." As the festival drew to a close, a familiar hologram materialized at the center of the hall, the head counselor of the Galactic Unity Council. The delegates quieted as the hologram's serene, swirling light addressed the room. "Commander Veltrin." The counselor began, "We have monitored the success of your cultural exchange program with great interest. The unifying effects of Southern breakfast are undeniable. However, reports of butter shortages and syrup rationing in 3 sectors suggest the need for additional oversight." Veltrin inclined his head. "Esteemed counselor, I acknowledge the logistical challenges. To address them, I propose the establishment of interstellar culinary academies, where species can learn to produce their own variations of Southern breakfast using locally sourced ingredients." The room buzzed with murmurs of approval. The counselor pulsed thoughtfully. "An intriguing proposal. It shall be considered." Veltrin nodded. "Thank you, counselor. Together, we can ensure that this tradition continues to unite our galaxy." Back aboard the ineffable Consensus, the crew celebrated the festival's success with an impromptu feast. Veltrin sat at the head of a table, savoring a bowl of grits topped with just a hint of sorghum syrup. Beside him, Corn poked cautiously at a biscuit, his antennae twitching with reluctant approval. Commander Corn said, setting down his fork, "While I still question the nutritional wisdom of this endeavor, I cannot deny its effectiveness." Veltrin inclined his head. "Southern breakfast, Lieutenant, reminds us that sometimes the simplest traditions can have the greatest impact." Corn sighed, taking another nibble of his biscuit. "Perhaps. But I still draw the line at molasses syrup." Veltrin's mandibles clicked in quiet amusement. To each their own. The mess hall echoed with laughter and conversation, a testament to the enduring power of biscuits, gravy, and the human tradition of sharing a meal.